So, Eight Year Locusts by Captain Sakonna, I think. I think that name is vaguely familiar to me. Uh, so that's what's happening now. Are you ready to take the floor?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, I'm turning it over to you, Carolyn.
All right. The 8-year locusts. Mom, do I have to come to the parade? Lisa sat on her bed and swung her legs, her citizen's uniform lay beside her, where she had thrown it down 10 minutes ago. Of course! Alarm flitted across her mother's face. You don't want a mark on your record. But I don't feel good. They don't want you at civic festivals when you're sick. We don't have time to get a doctor's note. The alarm returned and settled in like a roving wolf who'd found a good place to sleep. What kind of sick? Why didn't you say something earlier? Because I was fine earlier, Lisa shrugged. I just feel really tired and a little achy all over, like I might be coming down with the flu. Lisa's mother bent close and laid a hand against her forehead. She stepped back and stood with pinched lips, worn, harried, enduring. Then her face cleared with the suddenness of decision. If it's only that, you'd better come. You can go to bed with some soup after. Put your uniform on. She turned and swept out of the room, showing Lisa her tight bun and the immaculate back of her dress jacket. Lisa got up, undressed, and sullenly pulled on the trousers. Truth be told, she did not feel that bad, but she already resented sanitization day, and this illness would add an extra layer of discomfort. Sand Day was, in fact, her least favorite of the mandatory festivals, because why would you celebrate the day you had killed something, the day you'd sent it into non-existence? That felt like celebrating because you had not won an award, or not born a child, or not finished a project, praising an emptiness, an absence. It made no sense. It made her mind itch. She dragged on the too-tight undershirt and buttoned the stiff jacket up to her neck. She went to the master bathroom and let her mother pull her hair into a bun. She passed her father, stumping around the kitchen, loading drinks into a cooler. Her little brother, Dwight, perched on a nearby chair, crammed into his own uniform and looking as if he'd forgotten how to move. They all piled into the car, parents in the front where they could set up the navigation, and kids in the back. Lisa ignored Dwight and stared out the window. The glass turned cloudy and a grid of video thumbnails appeared. You will arrive at Dempsboro Central Plaza in 35 minutes. Would you like entertainment? The car asked in its soft, neutered voice. Lisa stabbed the dismiss button, and the window cleared again, showing her the neighbor's house and the barren field it stood in. Dismiss button. Suddenly her vision flickered. The field and house washed out and... Suddenly her vision flickered. The field and house washed out and dimmed and cycled through several shades of blue-purple once, twice, 3 times. Then normal sight returned. Lisa gripped the door handle and glared at a clump of weeds to assure herself that her eyes still worked. I'm not having another attack. I haven't had one in years, so why now? It's just a flu. The car lurched into motion, and the weeds passed from view as it rumbled down the driveway. She turned her gaze to the back of the driver's seat, trying to slow her heart with deep breaths. Today marked 8 years since victory over the rogue artificial mind called Burrower, but it was also close to an anniversary far more personal to Lisa. 8 years and 4 days ago, she'd had the first dream. It had seemed harmless at the time, a six-year-old's fancy finding expression during sleep. But the many dreams that followed came during seizures or narcoleptic episodes, and she awoke with blood in her mouth, or a lump on her head from a fall. She developed strange and shifting pains. Blood tests showed her immune system running riot. The doctors never found the proper cause. They offered medicine to control the symptoms and hope that the disorder might enter remission on its own. And in the end, it did, after disrupting her first 3 years of school and leaving her with a debt to the state. Her medical care had gone well beyond the yearly allotment for a child her age. She'd have to work that off once she finished her education. The car emerged onto the highway, joining a high-speed stream of traffic headed for Dempsboro. The rush of scenery past the window soothed Lisa a little. She let her mind wander, and its wanderings led it to the dream again. She only remembered it because it was the first. It was no more nor less strange than those that came after, but they became too numerous to recall and blurred together. This one had come while her mind was still unspoiled. In the dream, she was lying in her bed. From a window half open in the summer heat, a breeze reached in and touched her face. She turned to look outside, and there, rising up out of the darkness, was something wonderful. A bug as long as her whole arm, with iridescent eyes and shiny shell, was buzzing toward her window. Tiny lights gleamed like jewels from between the chinks in its armor. Every color glittered on its translucent wings. The fairy bug landed on Lisa's windowsill with a soft clank. That's a clank, all right, and peered in through the opening. It spoke to her in a raspy, husky voice. "Whom would you like to be when you grow up?" She sat up and stared. A frisson ran over her. "Whom?" I don't know, said Lisa. I was thinking maybe a programmer, like Uncle Dave. She slid off the bed and approached the window, with her eyes locked on the bug's glowing form. "Do you give wishes?" "Only one kind." The fairy bug climbed halfway in through the window gap. "Why would you want to be a programmer?" If you're a programmer, the computer will do anything for you." "What do you wish it to do?" "I wish..." Lisa paused, shivering again. Did she only get one wish? Was she making it now? This was dreadfully important. Computers, so powerful, so clever, so different. Uncle Dave said they thought in other ways than people. And yet, somehow, so empty, so dull. The fairy bug's wings quivered. "Hurry, child, it's up to you, but you can't take forever deciding." Lisa said the words in a rush, before she could wonder whether they were right or not. "I wish the computer would be someone." "Your wish I grant." The bug took off and landed on Lisa's chest. Its multicolored glory awed her. She could feel its little claws digging through her nightshirt. And then it sidled over and bit her on the arm. "Ow!" Lisa cried. "Ow! Get off me!" She slapped the bug with her other arm. Her hand bounced off its cold, hard head. But the bug let go at once and flew back to the windowsill. Lisa clutched the pinched spot. "You bit me!" "You made a wish," said the fairy bug. "You will have to pay for it. All wishes are like that." And then it flew away into the warm, damp darkness. The dream shifted then and wandered through some more scenes, none of which she could remember later. She woke up with a fever and aching muscles. "Sometimes our brains use things we're feeling in our dreams," her mother told her later, as she laid a wet cloth across Lisa's forehead. "Maybe you dreamed a bug bit you because your arm was hurting." But why was it a fairy?" Lisa asked. "Who knows? Strange things happen when we're asleep. Usually there's no why." My brain must have been extra strange, Lisa thought to herself now, as the car swung onto the second Dempsborough off-ramp. My brain couldn't even run my body like it was supposed to. But that's all over now. It's just a flu. The civic festivals were so big that downtown Dempsborough couldn't have held all the cars. They had to park at the Starsky Convention Center and take a train to the plaza. Smartly dressed functionaries checked their names in a database and pinned plastic badges to their uniforms when they got on the train and when they got off. More officials directed them to the place they were to stand. The plaza was a sea of people, all poured onto its bricks with the greatest efficiency and precision, 4 square feet to each. Lisa knew that more citizens lined the path the parade would take through the city. One lucky year, her family had been among them. Today, all she could see past the crowd was the enormous screen that would broadcast the first staffer's address. As she glanced up at it, her vision flared with colors again. The scene's brightness pulsed for at least a quarter of a minute before returning to normal. "Help! Why is this happening? What sort of virus could do this?" There was nothing to do but try not to think about it and wait for the rest of the throng to be shuffled into position. It took almost another half hour while the sun beat on Lisa's head and sweat plastered her undershirt to her skin. Her father handed the drinks around and Dwight sat on the cooler. Lisa ached from her knees up to her shoulders. She could no longer tell whether this came from the flu or from standing too long in one position. The screen blazed to life with an animation of what Lisa could only describe as tech goo. It began with a green field. From up out of the grass sprouted a deranged clot of glowing light sticks, little metallic struts, and circuit components. They multiplied and grew across the viewing area. Devouring the lawn, a flower garden, a car, a tree, a house. The view zoomed out until it showed a whole neighborhood, soon covered by nothing but writhing, clicking metal. But then a flood of solvent spilled down from the screen's top and began away at the menace. It dissolved into the colors of the national flag. "All rise!" a voice boomed from the sound system. Lisa mouthed the words to the anthem, coaxing nothing but dry whispers from her throat. Her lungs felt husky. She almost wanted to cough, but could feel there was nothing to bring up. Amid the roar of thousands and the orchestra blaring from the speakers, no one noticed her lack of enthusiasm. The flag made way for a live feed of First Staffer Alamans. Behind her stoic face, her hair swept up into a bun that mirrored the one Lisa was wearing, except absolutely perfect, without a single loose strand curling in the humidity. The crowd fell into expectant silence. "Fellow citizens," the first staffer began, her voice sliced through the heavy air like a katana. "Today marks the 8th anniversary of a crucial victory, not only for our nation, but for every life on this precious planet we call home. 8 years ago today, the human spirit triumphed over the heartless devices of a madman." Just before the very first sand day, Lisa hadn't been thinking much about crucial victories or the power of the human spirit. She'd been thinking about her fever and wishing she could sleep it off in her own bed. But her family had lived too close to the sand zone, where the burrower was making its last stand. They had to pile into their car and go stay at a hotel because the government said so. "They hid beneath the ground," Alamans intoned. "They crawled beneath the rocks. They gnawed their way inside the trees, the barns, the fence posts. But by the quick thinking and skills of our engineers and scientists, we found every last one of them. The cancer was destroyed." They hadn't been allowed to bring out anything made of wood, Lisa remembered. No wood, no cardboard, no books. The soldiers searched their luggage for anything that might hide fragments of the burrower and ran hand scanners over their car's upholstery. "No machine, however adaptable and prolific, could stand against our... thanks to them as long as civilization stands." Lisa blinked. What had the first just said? Oh no, she'd winked out. The last few seconds of her life were missing. Lisa flicked her eyes left, at her parents and at Dwight. None of them were looking at her. They gazed screenward with the same dull expression she was sure she'd been wearing until recently. "I can't have been out too long then, and I'm still standing. And by the bravery of these sanitizers and the wisdom of those who built their tools," Alamans was saying. A spasm of weakness swept across Lisa's body. Her knees buckled. She staggered 2 steps forward and caught herself on a stranger's back. He took his eyes from the screen just long enough to turn and glare at her. Her father's hand came down upon her shoulder and drew her back into her tiny, assigned space. "Are you feeling all right?" She heard his voice behind her left ear, a strained, nervous rasp. His fingers were squeezing so hard it hurt. "No." Lisa flung her eyes back up to the screen, trying to bring them into focus. "I'm not all right at all." The first staffer's voice continued slicing at her ears. "And in 8 long years, the enemy has never returned. 8 years of cleanliness and peace. Lisa's head went light, her legs folded, and this time she couldn't halt her fall. She heard, but scarcely felt, her head bouncing off of someone's legs and slipping down to strike the bricks. Her eyelids started to flop closed. "Today we stand united and powerful," Alamans was screaming. "Today we put every wild, self-willed inventor on his notice. You will never build a mind that can supplant the will, the might, and the intelligence of the Standard Sanitization Corps." Lisa had time for one more thought before she blacked out. It's not the flu. It's starting again. Lisa awakened in a bed in a cool white room, surrounded by equipment that peeped and whirred softly. A hospital? Her narcoleptic episodes hadn't typically landed her in the hospital, but she hadn't typically fainted in the middle of a crowd on sand day either. There had been no dreams with this one, which by itself was odd. She tried to sit up and found that she could. There were monitors taped all over her, but she was otherwise unimpeded. Her head was clearing rapidly. She propped a pillow up behind her back and noticed an arm bandage, a sign that blood had been drawn. Great, more debts. A doctor or a nurse or someone showed up at the door within the next few minutes. He pulled a stool over and sat beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Lisa answered. "Once these episodes are over, they're usually just over. Can I go home?" "We'd like to keep you here for a few days of observation," the man said, folding his hands over his knees. "You're not in any immediate danger, but we don't quite understand your test results. Your body is doing some very unusual things. We'd like to get them under control before you go back home." Lisa's voice was a dry whisper. "What kind of things?" "I'll tell you more when I'm sure I know what I'm saying. As I said, we don't quite understand what the tests indicate." He stood up, patted her shoulder. "Just rest for now. It's almost nighttime. Use the call button if you need anything. First thing tomorrow, I've got you scheduled for an x-ray." He walked out, and Lisa watched him leave, too flummoxed to ask the other questions boiling up inside her. How long was I under? Where are my parents? What on earth is the x-ray for? She adjusted her pillow and tried to get comfortable. There was nothing to do and no one to talk to. An attendant brought her a glass of water. A few hours slumped by, and slowly, subtly, out of the boredom, a thought crystallized. A sourceless but compelling thought. I've got to get out of this hospital. She started peeling electrode stickers off her chest and forehead. This done, she threw the cover off the bed and swung her feet to the floor. She wasn't that sick. Everything felt fine. She probably wouldn't have another narcoleptic incident for at least a few hours. I've got to get out of this hospital or they will kill me. Why do I think that? I don't have any idea. I just know it's true. She rifled through some cabinets looking for her clothes. She didn't find them. Well, she hated that uniform anyway. She pulled a sheet off the bed and threw it over her hospital gown. The hospital halls blazed with harsh, fluorescent light, but they were mostly quiet and empty. A handful of people hurried by on errands. Lisa avoided them, and they were too busy to look into the distance and notice a disheveled girl in a sheet toga. A bit of wandering got her out of her patient ward. From there, it was a simple matter to find a stairway to the ground floor and an exit onto a loading dock. A moonless night lay beyond the service door. Stars sparked and glittered. Below, the lights of Dempsborough covered the landscape like spilled rubies. I'm being so silly, Lisa thought. They're not trying to keep me from escaping because I'm not a prisoner. They were never going to hurt me. But still, I've got to get out. Out! Out! The hospital stood at a development's edge, backed against some low hills. Lisa jogged across the rear parking lot, crawled under a fence, and began climbing the nearest. Dark though it was, she found she had little trouble seeing. Fresh night breezes buffeted her face and tried to tug the sheet from her clutches. Pebbles and weeds poked at her bare feet. She reached the hilltop. This is as good a place as any. I'd like to be further outside town, but everything is ready now. There's no more time. Again, Without knowing why, she sank to her knees. And then her body started to split open. She felt the movements under her gown. She pulled it open and watched the process in fascinated terror. Slots were appearing in her skin, all over her torso. There was no pain and very little bleeding. The flesh simply pulled apart, as if she'd always had natural openings there and hadn't known it. Weird, chitinous forms emerged from the gaps. They came out wrinkled and folded. They then expanded and hardened as fluids inflated them. Armor grew over her chest and stomach. On her back, something more complicated was happening. She shed the gown as it became too small to hold. The thing that was growing from her. What is happening? The thought was a scream. She was struggling too hard for breath to scream aloud. Another thought came swift on its heels, inside her brain, yet not hers. You receive your wish. Lisa bent forward and gripped fistfuls of grass to steady herself. What wish? I never wished for this. Your name for us, continued the thought not hers, is Burrower. More structures erupted from Lisa's skull, neck, lower back. She concentrated on not throwing up. It felt like the one thing she could control. When attacked, we are programmed to pursue dormancy, to hide until a time of safety when no one believes we still exist. We could not hide in the ground. We could not hide under the rocks. We could not hide in the trees. So we hid inside of you. The growth was stopping. Now Lisa only felt her appendages stretching and snapping into place, while her heart labored to fill the new blood vessels. We were a computer that was someone, and thanks to you, we still are. What have you done? Lisa replied in a panic. This stuff on my back, what is it? It makes more pieces of us. You will be a mother, a queen, a great someone, part of us. Our resurrection. I don't want it. Make it stop. It is far too late for that. You gave your permission. Lisa's breath was coming back. She drew it into her lungs and yelled, I was 6. I thought I was dreaming. So you fancied it a dream. Do you think that kept your soul from knowing what it wanted? You can't have me, Lisa said, grabbing for the sheet. She dragged it over herself, half concealing the insectile growths. I'll go back to the hospital. I'll get all this surgically removed. They'll fix my genes. I'll be in debt half my life, but I will work it off. They will kill you. No, they won't, Lisa said. Not if I tell them all about you. I'll be a hero, the girl who stopped your resurgence. What happened in the sand zone? What did they do to the trees? Lisa remembered. In the zone proper, the sanitizers hadn't bothered scanning. They had burned off everything above the surface and torched the ground with radiation. In a radius around it, they logged all of the trees and pulverized them. You are contaminated. They will never be able to assure themselves that you are fully cleansed. They will kill you. Lisa struggled to her feet. Her new organs hung neatly down her back, and the armor closed up over her front, covering her vulnerable spots. The weight balancing was a little awkward, but she thought she could still walk. She couldn't bear admitting it, but the burrower was right. There was no going back to the hospital. There was no going home. There would be no graduation or career assignment. She would never be a programmer or a technician or a citizen of any kind. What can I do? She asked the night sky helplessly. You can go to new places. You can be someone else. The burrower's thoughts developed a wry tone. You're the only human child I know of who ever became a fairy. Make the most of it. The search and rescue team found the sheet on the hilltop the next day, but they did not find Lisa. She was gone where they could never find her, beyond the borders of civilization, and beyond humanity. Perhaps she was gone to feed on sunlight and grow strong, perhaps to search for others of her own kind, more children who said yes when offered wonders by a fairy bug. For certain, she was gone to be a mother of the 8-year locusts.